I came home to a letter taped to the refrigerator. No envelope, no kindness, just bold black ink across the page. It listed her demands like an invoice. Divorce, the house, 70% of our savings, 5 years of alimony. At the bottom, almost as an afterthought, her handwriting. You're just a teacher. You can't afford a lawyer. My name is David Miller, 39 years old. I've been teaching history at Lincoln High School in Denver for over a decade. I wasn't wealthy, but I wasn't weak either. I'd built my life piece by piece, the way my father taught me, patiently, quietly, never showing my hand until it mattered. And in that moment, reading her words, I didn't shout. I didn't crumble. I just folded the paper, set it aside, and let the silence do what anger never could. When she walked into the kitchen that night, she was smiling, almost triumphant. She laughed about how simple it would be. A teacher's salary versus her attorney's sharpened teeth. She mocked the idea that I'd even try to fight. To her, the outcome was already carved in stone. I nodded once, said nothing, and cleared the table. That was all. Inside, though, the gears were already moving. I've never been the man who talks first. I was raised to plan before striking, to measure every angle. I didn't grab my phone and call her bluff. I didn't throw accusations. I went to my office, pulled a notebook from the bottom drawer, and wrote 3 words across the first page. Freeze. Track. Respond. Freeze meant discipline. No emotional reactions, no reckless moves. Track meant evidence. Finances, accounts, patterns, every detail she thought I wasn't sharp enough to notice. Respond, that would come later. I started with the joint account. Transfers had already begun, small but regular. She thought she was clever, pulling money before filing, leaving just enough for bills. I documented everything. Screenshots, dates, amounts. Quietly, methodically, I built a ledger of betrayal. Next came the house. The deed was in both our names, but I remembered something she didn't. The initial down payment had come from my father's inheritance, money I'd documented years ago. I pulled the old files, scanned them, and stored them twice. One copy in my desk, another in a cloud drive she didn't know existed. Nights turned into weeks. She flaunted her new lifestyle like it was already hers. Shopping trips, dinners with friends, whispering calls in the other room. Every laugh, every dismissive smile, every little jab only made me quieter, colder. She believed silence meant defeat. She didn't understand it was my weapon. The day the court summons arrived, she was radiant, like someone about to watch the final act of a play she had written herself. She didn't see the folders I carried out to my car, didn't notice the meetings I slipped into downtown, didn't suspect that the man she dismissed as just a teacher was preparing for a lesson of his own. And when the day finally came, when she walked into the courtroom with her polished lawyer by her side, her eyes landed on the person sitting beside me. For the first time in months, her smile froze. Her frozen smile in that courtroom didn't happen by accident. It was the result of weeks spent moving in silence while she paraded around as if she'd already won. She thought I was powerless. She thought a teacher's salary meant weakness. She was wrong. After I wrote those 3 words in my notebook, freeze, track, respond, I built my routine with military precision. I didn't confront her about the missing money. I didn't ask why she was coming home late or why her phone was always face down. I let her believe I was blind. But every night, when she fell asleep, I worked quietly under the dim light of my desk lamp. I started with finances. Every joint account transaction went into my file. Every charge that didn't line up with our normal expenses was logged. Boutique stores we'd never shopped at. Weekend hotel stays she couldn't explain. I didn't ask questions. I documented everything. Silence became my ally. Then I moved to property. I dug through years of paperwork, mortgage records, refinance attempts, property tax receipts. Buried inside an old folder, I found the document I needed most. The down payment traced back to my inheritance, legally mine before our marriage. That was leverage she didn't see coming. I made multiple certified copies, stored them in different places. One on my desk, one in a safe deposit box, one in digital form, encrypted, untouchable. I thought about our savings. She believed draining accounts would leave me cornered, unable to fight. But long before this collapse, I'd built a second account in my own name, quietly diverting small amounts of each paycheck. It wasn't much at first, barely noticeable. But over years, it grew into a cushion big enough to matter. A teacher's salary doesn't make you rich, but it does reward those who prepare. She never suspected. Every day, I wore the same calm mask. At school, I lectured about revolutions, betrayals, and wars fought not by shouting, but by strategy. My students never knew that, at night, their teacher was preparing for his own battle. The first time she mentioned lawyers, she laughed in my face. "You can't afford one," she told her friend over wine in the kitchen, thinking I couldn't hear. I didn't react. I didn't even look up. But in my notebook that night, I wrote a name. Someone she didn't know. Someone who owed me a favor. An old college friend, now one of the sharpest attorneys in Denver. We hadn't spoken in years, but when I called, his voice was steady. He said, "I remember you always kept records, David. Bring me what you've got." I did. Folders, spreadsheets, documents she thought were hidden. He studied them carefully, then nodded once. "You've been underestimated. That's their mistake." From that moment, I stopped feeling like prey. I wasn't chasing her or begging for scraps. I was building a case brick by brick, and each silent day that passed only tightened the trap. So when she finally filed and walked into that courtroom with her high-priced attorney, she thought it was checkmate. She thought my silence meant surrender. But she didn't realize silence was the sound of preparation. And the moment she saw who was sitting beside me, she understood the game had just begun. The courtroom was just the beginning. What froze her smile that day wasn't only the man beside me. It was the realization that I hadn't been asleep at the wheel. I'd been watching, recording, waiting, and now every step she took echoed louder than before. My attorney, Michael, moved with quiet efficiency. He didn't storm or grandstand. He just asked for my files, studied them, and said little. That was when I realized why we had always been friends. We both understood the value of silence. In the weeks that followed, he guided me through a process I already knew instinctively. Document everything, reveal nothing. Meanwhile, at home, she strutted like a victor. She talked on the phone late at night, laughing with friends about how easy it would be to bleed me dry. She flaunted new clothes, new jewelry, and whispered conversations with people I didn't recognize. Each move she made, I logged. Each dollar she spent that wasn't accounted for, I traced. I didn't confront her. That would have ruined the advantage. Instead, I made myself smaller, quieter, like a shadow in the corner of her new life. She thought I was broken, retreating into silence. She didn't know silence was the very thing tightening around her neck. The first crack appeared when Michael filed our response. We weren't contesting the divorce itself. We were contesting the terms. Every demand she'd made, 70% of savings, 5 years of alimony, full control of the house, was struck with calm precision. And we countered with proof. Proof the down payment came from my inheritance. Proof of her hidden spending, draining joint funds for her own lifestyle. Proof she had already been moving money to an account under her name alone. When her lawyer saw the files, his confidence faltered. He had expected a schoolteacher with no resources. Instead, he found a teacher with a war chest of evidence, backed by a lawyer who knew how to use it. At home, I stayed the course. I cooked dinner, graded papers, kept the house quiet. She interpreted my calm as weakness, but every night, I added more to my file. Emails she forgot to delete. Bank alerts she didn't realize I received. Small details, but each one added weight. The pressure began to show. She grew sharper, more irritable. She accused me of spying, even though I never touched her phone. She snapped at small things, like dishes left in the sink or mail stacked on the counter. It wasn't the housework. It was the silence. She couldn't read me anymore, and that unsettled her. One evening, she cornered me in the kitchen, eyes blazing. She said, "You think you're clever. You think you can fight me." I didn't respond. I simply looked at her, then turned back to the stove. That silence said more than words ever could. Because the truth was simple, she had already lost control. She just didn't know it yet. The cracks in her confidence widened with every passing week. She still dressed like she was untouchable, still walked into court with her chin high, but I could see the tension in her hands, the way her lawyer whispered longer each time before they faced the judge. What had once been a performance of control was beginning to unravel. Michael told me to keep doing exactly what I was doing, staying calm, staying invisible. He said, "People like her collapse under pressure, not because of what you say, but because of what you don't." I understood. Silence was my weapon, and I wielded it with care. At home, she grew restless. Nights were no longer filled with laughter on the phone. Instead, she paced from room to room, clutching her cell as if it were a lifeline. Sometimes she locked herself in the bedroom for hours, whispering into the receiver. Other times, she'd glare at me across the table, searching for signs of panic. I gave her none. Behind that mask of calm, I moved steadily. I deepened my file. Subpoenas pulled her financial trail apart piece by piece. Every transaction told a story she didn't want told. Luxury purchases on shared accounts. Cash withdrawals at odd hours. Payments to someone she insisted was a friend from work. The paper didn't lie, and the silence with which I presented it made it louder than any accusation. The more evidence surfaced, the sharper her lawyer's tone became. During one hearing, he muttered that her case was not as strong as she'd led him to believe. She shifted uncomfortably in her chair, shooting me a glance, but I didn't flinch. I kept my hands folded, my eyes forward, like a soldier at parade rest. The escalation came quietly. One morning, I woke to find the garage half empty. Tools gone, boxes missing, things I'd collected over years. She thought she could strip me piece by piece, that I would break when the house felt hollow. I didn't react. I logged each item, filed an insurance claim, and handed the list to Michael. He nodded once, said, "This only strengthens your position." Her frustration boiled over. She accused me of turning the court against her, of poisoning her reputation. But all I had done was present facts. Cold, documented, undeniable. The louder she grew, the quieter I became. The judge noticed. Jurors noticed. Silence has a weight people underestimate. One night, after another long hearing, she stormed into the kitchen, slammed a glass on the counter, and said, "You can't keep this up forever. You'll crack." I stirred my coffee and said nothing. My silence filled the room, heavy, suffocating. She left without finishing her drink. By then, even her friends had started to pull away. What had begun as a confident march toward victory had turned into something else, a desperate scramble to hold on to an illusion. And I knew the pressure would only grow from here, because this was no longer about divorce. It was about control, and she was losing it, one silent moment at a time. Her desperation became obvious the day she called my school. She must have thought dragging my career into the fight would give her leverage. She told the administration that I was unstable, distracted, and unfit to teach. She claimed I'd been neglecting students, letting my personal life bleed into the classroom. The principal called me in, concern on his face. I sat across from him, steady, and let him speak. When he was finished, I slid a folder across the desk. Inside were evaluations, emails from parents, test scores, and performance reviews. All spotless, all recent. He studied them, then leaned back in his chair. His voice was low. He said, "Looks like someone's trying to rattle you." I nodded once, and that was the end of it. Her attack had failed before it even began. But her moves didn't stop. Days later, I discovered she'd attempted to freeze one of our joint accounts. It would have worked if I hadn't already transferred my portion to the separate account years earlier. What she didn't realize was that her action left a trail, one Michael could present as another attempt at financial manipulation. The judge noted it in the record. Quietly, my case grew stronger. Every new move she made was louder, more erratic. She stormed out of hearings, slammed papers onto tables, snapped at her own lawyer. Her confidence had turned brittle. I remained silent, calm, letting her unravel while I sat steady. Judges notice things like that. So do clerks. So does everyone in the room. At home, her anger boiled into reckless decisions. She started bringing people into the house, strangers, friends I'd never met. They sat in the living room drinking, laughing too loud, as if the chaos could cover her fear. I stayed in my study, working under lamplight, filing every detail into my growing archive. One night, I logged into the home security system, downloaded footage, and stored it on a drive. Every unfamiliar face became evidence. The escalation reached its peak when she confronted me directly. She stood in the doorway, eyes sharp, voice trembling, and accused me of sabotaging her life. She said, "You're trying to destroy me." I didn't answer. I simply closed my notebook, placed my pen beside it, and walked past her without a word. Silence, again, was heavier than anything I could have said. Her panic only deepened when Michael filed our next motion. He presented evidence not just of her financial misconduct, but of her attempts to damage my career and reputation. The judge's expression hardened. Her lawyer shifted uncomfortably in his seat, and for the first time, she didn't look at me with contempt. She looked at me with fear, because by then, she understood. This wasn't a battle of words. It was a war of patience, of precision, and she was playing against someone who had been preparing in silence from the very beginning. By the time summer arrived, her panic had turned into recklessness. She was no longer just playing offense in court. She was lashing out everywhere, hoping something would stick. Friends she once confided in began keeping their distance. Neighbors stopped waving when she passed. The image she had built of herself as the confident, wronged wife was cracking in full view of everyone around her. I didn't celebrate it. I didn't gloat. I simply kept moving in silence. Michael reminded me often, let her noise build the case for you. And that was exactly what happened. Each frantic move she made became another stone on her back. She tried again to tamper with our accounts, transferring money without notice. The bank flagged it this time. I didn't confront her. Instead, I documented the notification, handed it to Michael, and watched it become another exhibit in our growing stack. Then came the house. She listed it quietly, behind my back, through an agent who thought he was doing a simple favor. What she didn't know was that the deed had a restriction. Thanks to the inheritance documentation, any sale required my explicit consent. When the paperwork reached the county clerk, it was rejected instantly. The agent panicked, backed out, and her plan collapsed before it began. All it left behind was a paper trail, another nail in her case. At home, her behavior spiraled. She slammed doors, shouted into the phone, accused me of ruining her life. I stayed calm. When she screamed, I stirred my coffee. When she demanded answers, I gave her none. My silence drove her mad, because she couldn't control it. Her lawyer called Michael privately. He admitted she was becoming difficult, that her demands were unrealistic, that he might have to withdraw. That was the moment I knew the tide had turned. When even her own representation couldn't keep up with the chaos she created, victory was no longer a question of if, but when. Still, I didn't relax. I knew better than to assume the battle was finished. Pressure makes people dangerous. And she was desperate now. One night, I found a note slipped under my study door. It was short, scrawled in anger. If you don't give me what I want, I'll ruin you. I'll make sure you lose everything. I stared at it for a long time, then placed it in a folder labeled evidence. Not rage, not fear, just another document, another detail, another quiet step forward. In court the next week, Michael presented the note alongside financial records, property attempts, and the recordings from our home security system. Her face turned pale as each piece was read into the record. By the end, her lawyer could barely defend her. That night, she didn't scream. She didn't threaten. She sat alone in the dark living room, staring at nothing. For the first time, she seemed to realize the truth. She wasn't holding the leash anymore. And I hadn't raised my voice once. The final stage of the trial didn't arrive with drama or spectacle. It came quietly, like the slow closing of a heavy door. By then, months of hearings and filings had taken their toll. Her once flawless image was gone, replaced by visible cracks of exhaustion and fear. Even her lawyer looked worn, carrying files that no longer seemed like weapons but burdens. Michael told me the night before, "Tomorrow is where we let silence speak. We don't argue, we don't posture. We simply present the truth and step back." That advice echoed in my head as I entered the courtroom. She was already seated, whispering furiously to her attorney. When she finally noticed me, I didn't look at her. I sat down, calm, steady, as if nothing about the outcome could disturb me. That composure unsettled her more than any words ever could. The judge opened the session. Evidence was presented again, laid out in sequence like stones in a path. Bank statements showing her withdrawals. Emails documenting her hidden spending. Records of her attempt to sell the house without consent. And finally, the note she had slipped under my door, her threat captured in her own handwriting. Each piece was read aloud. Each one fell into the silence of the courtroom like a hammer striking glass. She shifted in her chair, glanced around nervously, and at one point whispered something sharp to her lawyer. He didn't reply. His silence mirrored mine. When it was Michael's turn, he didn't raise his voice or fill the room with rhetoric. He spoke slowly, plainly. He explained the inheritance that funded the down payment. He explained the secret account she had built for herself. He explained her attempts to sabotage not just finances, but my career. When he finished, he simply closed his folder and sat down. Her attorney rose to respond, but his words were thin, defensive, unconvincing. Even he seemed to know the ground beneath him was gone. He argued for fairness, for compromise, but the evidence drowned him. The judge barely lifted her eyes as he spoke. Through it all, I remained still, hands folded, eyes forward. My silence said what needed to be said. I didn't need to beg for justice. I had built it, piece by piece, and it now stood on its own. By the end of the day, the judge recessed with a promise to deliver her ruling soon. As we stood to leave, my wife turned toward me. For the first time since this began, she didn't look defiant. She looked small. She mouthed something, maybe anger, maybe fear, but I didn't respond. I walked past her without a word. That night, back at home, I poured myself a coffee and sat in the quiet of my study. The storm had raged for months, but now the silence felt heavier, final. The waiting was almost over. And she knew it. The ruling came on a gray Thursday morning. Courtrooms are rarely dramatic places. No gavel slams, no shouting matches. Just a judge reading words that carry the weight of lives. That day, her words carried the end of my marriage and the end of her illusions. We both sat in silence as the judge entered and began to read. She detailed the findings methodically, almost clinically. The inheritance was mine, untouchable. The house, therefore, was awarded to me. Our savings were to be split evenly, not drained at her convenience. Alimony was denied on grounds of financial misconduct. And as for her attempts to manipulate accounts and damage my career, the court acknowledged them, noted them, and placed her under financial restrictions moving forward. Each sentence landed like a hammer. My wife's face tightened with every word, the color draining from her skin. She had walked into this war expecting to strip me of everything. Now, she was leaving with less than she ever imagined. Her lawyer shifted uncomfortably, adjusting his glasses, as if hoping the floor would open beneath him. He had fought for her, but her lies had been too loud, her actions too reckless. Evidence doesn't break under pressure. It hardens, and that evidence had built a wall she couldn't climb. When the judge finished, the room stayed quiet. No applause, no gasps, just the heavy stillness of a verdict. I stood, nodded once to Michael, and gathered my folder. She turned toward me, eyes wide, mouth opening as if to speak. But nothing came out. My silence followed me out the door, leaving her frozen in place. Outside, the air felt different. Not lighter exactly, but clean. For the first time in months, I could breathe without the weight of her demands pressing down on me. Michael walked beside me, calm as ever. He said only one thing before leaving. You did this by not doing what she expected. That's why you won. At home that night, the house was quiet. Too quiet. Her things were still scattered across rooms, reminders of the life we had shared and the war we had fought. But now they felt meaningless. Just clothes, just objects, stripped of their power. I sat in my study, opened my notebook, and looked at the first page. Freeze. Track. Respond. 3 words that had carried me through a storm. 3 words that had turned silence into strength. I closed the notebook for the last time, slid it into the drawer, and let the quiet settle around me. The war was over. The silence had won. But endings have a way of leaving echoes. And I knew hers would come soon. After the ruling, I expected distance. I expected anger, maybe silence from her side too. Instead, what came was something I had prepared for, but never fully trusted, her sudden softness. It started with small gestures. A message late at night, saying she hadn't meant for things to go this far. A note left on the counter the day she came to collect her belongings, written in a tone that pretended to be gentle. She even called once, her voice quiet, almost fragile, asking if we could talk, like adults. But I had learned. These weren't olive branches. They were tools, weapons disguised as apologies. When power slips, some people try to rebuild it not with force, but with pity. And pity, if you let it inside, will undo months of preparation. I didn't respond. Not to the notes, not to the calls. I stayed quiet, the same way I had been from the start. Silence had carried me this far. It would carry me through the aftermath. Neighbors started whispering. Some thought I had been too harsh. Others believed her story, that I had turned cold overnight, that I was the one who ruined things. But reputations never worried me. I had the truth, documented and sealed. I didn't need the court of public opinion. I had already won where it mattered. Her attempts to draw me back grew bolder. She showed up at the school one afternoon, waiting by the parking lot, her eyes wet, her smile trembling. She wanted me to stop, to talk, to let her rewrite the narrative. I walked past her without breaking stride. That silence cut deeper than any words ever could. Later that evening, I found another message slipped under my door. It was shorter than the last ones. You'll regret this. One day, you'll see I was the best thing you had. I read it once, placed it in the same folder as before, and locked the drawer. Evidence, nothing more. Michael called to check in. He asked if I needed further action, restraining orders, additional filings. I told him no. The court had already spoken. The rest was just noise. And noise only has power if you answer it. At night, the house was still, empty in ways I hadn't felt before, but steady. The echoes of her presence lingered, but they no longer weighed me down. They were just shadows on the wall, fading slowly with each day of silence. She had tried anger. She had tried control. She had tried pity. None of it mattered anymore. Because when the final weapon left to someone is manipulation, and it meets only silence, it dies on its own. And that was exactly what I gave her. The quiet after a war is different from ordinary silence. It doesn't feel peaceful. It feels heavy, like the walls themselves are still echoing with the memory of every battle fought inside them. That was what my house felt like in the months after the divorce was finalized. Still standing, but carrying scars. I moved methodically through those months the same way I had moved through the case. Calm, precise, without wasted energy. I boxed up her belongings and left them on the porch. She collected them one afternoon while I was at work. When I returned, the boxes were gone, and for the first time in years, the house was truly mine. The court had given me everything I needed. The house, half the savings, freedom from alimony. But what it couldn't give me was quiet inside my own head. That part, I had to build myself. And so I did, one routine at a time. Teaching during the day, working late in my study at night, filling the hours with plans for the future instead of shadows of the past. She tried, once more, to break through. A final letter arrived in the mail. Long, rambling, filled with apologies and accusations woven together. At the bottom, one last attempt. We could still fix this. You know we could. I didn't reply. I folded it, placed it in the same folder as the threats, and closed the drawer. Evidence, nothing more. That was the last time I ever heard from her. Seasons changed. The whispers from neighbors died down. The questions from colleagues faded. Life moved on, and so did I. What she had taken, time, energy, trust, I rebuilt, brick by brick, in silence. I thought back often to that first letter she taped to the refrigerator. Her demands, her laughter, her certainty that I was too small, too weak, too poor to fight back. And I thought of the look on her face in court when she saw who stood beside me. That frozen smile was the moment she realized her mistake. She had underestimated the power of patience. She had mistaken silence for surrender. But silence had been the strategy all along. I didn't win by shouting. I didn't win by begging. I didn't even win by fighting her directly. I won by refusing to play her game. By letting the truth gather weight until it crushed her lies on its own. By choosing silence where she expected noise. Now, when I sit in the evenings with a cup of coffee, I don't hear her voice anymore. I hear only quiet. The kind of quiet that feels earned, like a shield I built with my own hands. Some men win by force. Some win by breaking their enemies loudly. I didn't need that. I rebuilt my life the same way I defended it. Quietly, methodically, with patience sharper than any blade. And in the end, that silence was louder than anything she ever said. Support the channel by liking, commenting, and subscribing. I promise even more interesting stories.